what set me off to find a living virus.
Hultin believed the virus lay trapped in the bodies of victims buried deep in the permafrost, the frozen soil of the high Arctic. He located a cemetery in Brevig, Alaska, a village hard hit by the 1918 virus. He planned to dig up graves, take lung tissue samples from the frozen corpses, and bring the virus back to life in his lab so that he could make a vaccine.
They were buried at least 6 feet deep. That was in the record. I started to dig, and at about 6 feet, 6.5 feet, we found 4 adults. The lung tissue was amazingly well preserved, and we collected the samples.
To try to bring the virus back to life, Hultin placed lung tissue in the nostrils of ferrets in the hope that they would catch the flu. Hultin knew he ran the risk that if it were alive, the virus might escape from his laboratory and start another deadly outbreak.
But the virus was simply dead. And that's why my PhD thesis didn't come off exactly as I had planned it. And I didn't become a famous virologist. I didn't all of those things.
40 years after Hultin's failure, another academic, Dr. Kirsty Duncan, a medical geographer with a passion for Highland dancing, read about his expedition and became obsessed by his quest.
I read a book, The Forgotten Pandemic. I was horrified, and I became determined to find out what caused it.
She assembled a scientific dream team, including Robert Webster. At their first meeting, they marched uneasily behind her into the conference hall.
I contacted leading flu experts and said, this is my idea. I would like to find bodies, flu victims buried in permafrost. What do you think? And the answer I got from every one of them is that if you find victims, call us.
For those of you who do not know me, I am the one who has phoned, faxed, written, faxed, and faxed you over the past 3.5 years. Greetings. I was interested in...
Duncan informed the team that she had found the death records of 7 young miners preserved in the icy ground of Svalbard. But like Hultin before them, some of the team believed that digging up the bodies could allow the 1918 virus to come back to life.
And I can tell you, it's a great concern to me. This virus, you have to think from the very beginning that you can't let this virus out. Everything has to be treated as though it was a transmissible Ebola-like virus. I mean, think what you're going to do here. The world press will slaughter us.
I like the glamour of maybe going into dig up a body, but my instinct scientifically is that we'll get the answer more easily from archived, well-documented tissues that have been preserved in a way that we understand.
The reference to archival tissue mystified Duncan. But stored in a vast military warehouse near Washington, D.C., are the remains of 4 generations of U.S. soldiers, samples of their organs preserved in wax. Duncan didn't realize that military pathologist Dr. Jeffrey Taubenberger was already working to find lung tissue samples from a victim of the 1918 pandemic.
This is an 80-year-old murder mystery. Certainly the techniques in 1918 were not available to identify the killer. The concept of viruses were just coming into being at that time, and influenza viruses were not yet recognized. Certainly nothing of genetic analysis was known. In essence, we feel that these little bits of lung tissue embedded in wax are allowing us to go back 80 years.
In Windsor, the flu experts were having second thoughts about Duncan's project. They weighed the risk of digging up bodies against the possibility of getting results from archived tissue. Duncan was dismayed.
I'm shocked. I'm disappointed by some of your final comments. For 2 years, some of you have expressed great interest and enthusiasm for this field project. Suddenly, we're talking about archival material. I don't feel that we can go any farther until we get something straight. As your host, this is very difficult for me to say. But if you're not committed to this field project, then I'll have to ask you to leave. This is your decision. I'll give you a chance to think that over.
I'm a little disturbed because I have absolute interest in this, as you know. But there's too much hype, and it would take minimum a year, 2 years of planning. And we're making a film about it before we begin.
I agree.
And we must stop and think scientifically. Because you ask us, you want me to leave? With this going on, I think I should leave.
I am asking who is committed. There will not be cameras.
We don't do this kind of thing. And this is, if you haven't sensed it, I mean, that's why we're all a little nervous.
But I've worked 3.5 years. And if you're committed...
I have worked a lifetime, my young lady. You're a neophyte in the area. None of us want to take what you've achieved. But, you know, get the science in now to put the science underneath before you go further.
I would not want to impose as a neophyte my views on you.
In the relative calm of his laboratory, Jeffrey Taubenberger was searching through slides of 1918 flu victims. Of the 4 million slides in the archive, only 72 cases related to 1918. His team was looking for the virus in the lung samples, but in most cases, the killer simply wasn't there. The virus had fled before the victims died of complications from its attack. And then he found it. The slide of Private Roscoe Vaughan. Vaughan fell ill on September 21, 1918, in a South Carolina transit camp on his way to the Western Front. He had a fever of 103, shaking, chills, and symptoms of pneumonia. He couldn't breathe, and he began to turn blue. 5 days later, he was dead. Army pathologists immediately performed an autopsy, and then they filed Private Vaughan away for the next 80 years, until Dr. Taubenberger retrieved slides of his lung tissue.
It was really such an awful thing to think of this devastation, to think of these healthy 20 and 21-year-old people dying in just a couple days after infection with this virus.
Taubenberger retrieved from the archive tiny pieces of Private Vaughan's lung. It had been preserved in formaldehyde and encased in wax. But the formaldehyde had shattered the structure of the virus into thousands of tiny fragments. Anne Reed was entrusted with the task of reassembling the virus's genetic code bit by bit. She searched through the lung tissue for a fragment of flu virus, a small foothold from which to build its entire genetic blueprint.
The influenza virus mutates very, very rapidly. It has a very inaccurate reproductive system so that it makes lots of mistakes when it reproduces. It's a result. If you look at 10 different influenza strains, you get 10 very different looking sequences.
For a full year, she compared the sample to known flu strains. Finally, she found a fragment that was a close match for other strains, but was still unique. The first ever glimpse of the 1918 virus.
There must be a genetic basis for the behavior of the virus. Since there were so many unusual features of 1918, the fact that it killed the wrong people, it killed young, healthy adults, it killed them in this extremely unusual way with hemorrhage and fluid in their lungs.
So Taubenberger and Reed kept sequencing and searching. But by the summer of 1997, they had a major problem. They were running out of tissue. The shortage of tissue gave the Svalbard expedition fresh impetus. And despite the loss of some prominent members, Duncan still had Robert Webster and other leading scientists on board. The team surveyed the Svalbard site in October 1997. They used radar to find the bodies of the 1918 victims. They hoped that if the bodies were deep in permafrost, they would be well preserved. Too close to the surface, they would have decomposed.
If the ground-penetrating radar showed that these bodies were close to the surface in the active layer, the project would have stopped. After over 4 years, it would just have stopped. We could see the soil disturbance. They matched where the crosses were. We saw that the disturbance was in the true permafrost below the active layer.
The radar suggested the frozen bodies were there, so they planned to return the next summer to carry out the exhumation. Meanwhile, Taubenberger had published his work on sequencing the 1918 flu using archival tissue. It brought a surprising response.
I happened to read an article by Jeffrey Taubenberger in Science. I wrote a letter to him and asked him, would he be interested in more material, in more tissue from that period, from victims buried in Alaska. I know where they are. I can go back and find more.
Well, it was amazing. You know, I took it over to Anne Reed and I said, Anne, you've got to read this. This is pretty remarkable.
Then he asked me, when can you go? He expected me to say the following year because expeditions take a very long time in planning. And I said, no, I'm sorry, I can't go this week, but I can go next week. And there was silence on the other end, and I knew what he was thinking. What kind of nut is this Dr. Holton in San Francisco?
The silence to which he refers was, I guess, just amazement that he would be able to not only agree to go, but then agree to go immediately.
I needed autopsy tools, but of course, being retired now, I didn't have access to that, so I looked around and I found my wife's pruning shears. So I packed the pruning shears and took off for Alaska. I have a tendency not to give up. So here I came 46 years later. Many pathologists who could do a better job than I, better virologists, better archaeologists, but I realized I had skills in all these fields, so I could do it all by myself. And I thought, this time, I'm not going to fail.
There were now two radically different approaches to recovering tissue from 1918 flu victims. While Duncan's state-of-the-art team emphasized safety for the living and respect for the dead, in August 1997, Holton decided to go it alone.
Clearly, you couldn't imagine two more different approaches to Dr. Holton's and to the proposal to go to Spitsbergen. Other things that Dr. Holton and I agreed on was that, one, we would want to make sure that this was done in a very quiet manner. The amount of publicity that had been generated over the Spitsbergen proposal was very, very large.
I come from the city of Toronto. This is from our mayor. I would like to thank you, Honorable Madam Governor, for your very kind welcome. Your work that you have undertaken is overwhelming. I should be excited because so many people have put in such great work. But it's really hard.
Canadian Dr. Charles Smith is the team's pathologist.
One of the things which I appreciate about Kirsty is her extraordinary sensitivity to the cemetery. Anytime I'm involved in an exhumation, I'm sensitive to the fact that we're disturbing a very special place, and one of the things which I appreciate in Kirsty is how deep her feelings run in that very area.
Since February 1998, Duncan and her team had known what Holton and Taubenberger were doing with dead virus. They announced they would try to obtain live virus, with all the risks that could entail.
The isolation tent that we're going to be using to cover the excavation site, we'll be walking it up the hill literally 5-6 inches at a time. There will be somebody behind it with a sort of braking system just in case anything goes wrong. We're currently putting in a winching system which will allow us to get it up this 1 in 4 slope or whatever it is.
Good stuff.
All right, John, are you working on this ship? Yes. All right, well then can you I think everyone's got fantastic expectations. The whole team, 15 people, thinking about this project every day. Every day I wake up. Do I think of the London Hospital? No, I think of this project. So it's been on everyone's mind. Probably too much.
Hold it, hold it, hold it, stop!
The cost of the expedition to Svalbard with all its high-tech safety measures is over $500,000.
You actually want to keep both worlds apart. We want to keep the material from the world of 1918 separate from the world of 1998. If any of the materials in those bodies are infectious, then we don't want to contaminate the world of 1998 with this frightful disease of 80 years ago.
Now, we'll have to develop a sign language then. We'll have to develop a sign language.
Yeah.
So you're hearing me now?
Yeah.
This is the first time I have seen the full Monty.
Yeah.
I've put the suits on and tried a pair of wellies, and that's as far as I'd gone. And tried the Tyveks, but not the whole schmoozle.
It's terrific. You've done a good job.
Thank you.
Johan Hultin had originally been drawn to the tiny village of Brevig in Alaska because its people had been ravaged by the 1918 flu. Here, out of a population of 87, only 14 survived. They were all children. They became orphans. The orphanage in the village named Brevig is abandoned now. It stands as a silent memorial to the tragedy that took place here in 1918.
The obstacle was to get permission. It was a different population in the village, and I had learned about Native American activism and some resistance to intrusion by the Western culture here. And I spoke to the matriarch of the largest family in the village, and a council meeting was called.
Call this joint meeting to order.
I'm a retired pathologist from San Francisco, and I have been here many times.
When Johan wanted to open the grave, they said, what if the germs are still alive and we get sick all over again? You know, they were scared. So I asked Dr. Johan if the germs were still active in those bodies. They probably might be active, or he said, no, the virus was dead already. So I said, go ahead. Something good might come out of the study.
August 19th, 1997, 11:10 p.m. to Jeffrey K. Tarbenberger, M.D. Status report. Permission to open grave granted by the village council in a special meeting today at 2:45 p.m. I began to dig at 4 p.m. By 8 p.m., 2 feet of soil had been removed from the site. So far, no permafrost. Today, rain, hard wind, 42 degrees. Best wishes, Johan.
We had this incredible fax correspondence. We would come in every day, and I would get this new fax, and everyone in the lab would read them and would pass them around, and it was just amazing. Here we are sitting in the sort of sterility of a molecular biology laboratory, and here he is with a shovel and a pickaxe eating tundra berries.
My initial reaction with Johan's study was, my God, that's going to upset the apple cart as regards our project. But I suppose by that time, we were way underway. We were like an express train that had been going along the rails. We could hardly jam the brakes on at that stage.
On Svalbard in August 1998, Duncan's team was feeling confident.
I think the probability of finding intact bodies in this grave is very high. And there's no reason to suppose that anything has happened to them. I see no reason why they should not be well preserved, perfectly preserved.
As to our chances of recovering the virus itself, I think they are somewhat remote, but nevertheless, the achievement of doing that would be so magnificent that it will be the kind of cherry on the cake.
The plan is getting better and better, and we have to think about it as an evolving, like the virus is evolving. The plan has to evolve, and we'll get better and better at it.
Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us.
It's an amazing mixture of things, isn't it, a project like this? I think the first thing that strikes you is how sad it would have been for their parents. I would have been for me. I could not imagine their parents ever coming here. So I can imagine what a worry it would be that you could never visit the graveyard of your child. On the other hand, something good may come of it. I have to read you my poem. It's called He Won, Didn't He? And it brings up this question of, would they have wanted to help? And I think the answer is yes. At first, when you felt the ache, you passed it off. Seasickness, anything but that. In the end, though, he won, didn't he? You were shocked when your first friend died, and then the next. In the end, 7 of you were laid in the small village hall with the flickering candles. So how will you view us? As serious explorers after truth? Will you be pleased or saddened? Will fear strike you? And will you resist? Or will a glow of pride pass through you? I think you will be pleased to help. It will be painless, we promise. Just a brief exposure to the light as we uncover you. Not completely, you understand. We want you to remain frozen forever, just as you are now. You'll not see me, but just my friend in white, masked, like a surgeon. But don't worry, just a small prick as we take our lung sample, like a biopsy, really. You won't mind. With your help, he may not win in the end.
August 21st, 6 a.m. I hired 4 workers. We reached permafrost at an average of 4.5 feet, a good sign for this time of the summer. Living conditions somewhat primitive. I sleep on the floor in the classroom. All the teachers are gone and the school is empty. In the comfort department, I found 1 can of corned beef. So here we have the first pieces of the remains in permafrost at this time in August. There is a skull.
Hulton began finding human remains, but none sufficiently preserved to be of use to him.
Now here is another victim of the flu. When the teeth, looking at them close up as I have, no tooth decay. Then when you look at its chest here, see the ribs there. I'm going to open the chest to see if there's something in there.
He found nothing, so Hulton and his crew continued to dig deeper into the permafrost, searching for well-preserved tissue among the bones. On Svalbard, unsettling news. Shortly after starting to dig, they struck wood.
Morning, everyone. Yesterday was the 5th day of work at the Svalbard Cemetery in Longyearbyen. Late in the afternoon, 3 wooden coffins were located a short distance from the surface of the ground. This morning, a 4th coffin has been discovered. These coffins are in the active layer above the permafrost. Only a small portion of the upper surface has been exposed, and no attempt has been made to open the coffins. The research team is excited by their findings, and the work will continue today with great attention, with continuing attention to safety issues and to issues of respect and dignity.
But does it mean that the coffins are not in frost, that they were not as deep as you thought they were, or?
I will turn this to Mr. Alan Hagenbottom of the Geological Survey of Canada.
They are in the active layer. They are therefore not frozen, and have obviously not been frozen either ever or for many years.
Thank you very much.
From the radar survey, Duncan's team had assumed that the bodies were frozen in permafrost. It looked now as if they were not.
If we'd analysed that data, and we all concluded that no, there's a permafrost layer and there's an active layer, and these people have been buried in the active layer, I think we would have called it off at that stage. I mean, the active layer is iffy. You know, it's not a very good. It's a terrible temperature, really, to preserve tissue, and even worse, to preserve influenza virus. I think we would have deduced that it was too much of a risk.
In Alaska, Hulton made his most important discovery.
Here's my favorite, Lucy.
Lucy was a name given to a skeleton of a woman 3,200,000 years old that shed light on human evolution. And I thought my Lucy would shed light on the mysteries of the 1918 flu pandemic.
This looks very good to me. Much better than I thought.
That's what you're looking for, huh?
The tissue has not decayed, it hasn't rotted, it has frozen and dried out. And this is a very good sign.
Needless to say, I am very pleased with that case. Mostly sunny, slight wind, 60 degrees. A great day. Best wishes, Johan.
I was just saying, Charles, I changed my opinion about Johan Hultin, the pathologist. I can see why he did it, because he did it in 51, and he said it was unfinished business, because he was going to write a PhD on it. And all those years later, he went back and finished his business. He's a pretty amazing character. He's kind of a one-off, I would say. Well, he's done thousands of autopsies and necropsies. I mean, he's an experienced person in that sense.
But did they involve the state authorities, medical legal authorities?
I don't think they had to.
No. Do you know the laws of the state of Alaska?
The faintest idea, no. But
does he?
He probably does, because he
is he a licensed physician in Alaska?
He worked.
Is he a licensed physician in Alaska?
I don't think you need to be a licensed physician to do sampling from a grave. Why should you need to be a licensed physician to do sampling from a dead corpse?
I put about 20 to 25% of the total lung tissue in alcohol, formalin, and RNA fixative. And we'll go back for more if later cases are not better. I have dug around and below Lucy, but found only bony remains of 2 individuals very close to her rather well-preserved body.
Hulton was able to get good samples because Lucy was so well preserved. But luck had played a role.
Sitting on an upside-down bucket and looking at the scene, I finally saw it. Lucy was obese. The fat had insulated her, retarding the decay.
Lucy's fat had preserved her for 80 years and provided Hulton with the tissue he needed.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Yesterday, the team completed a 7th successful day at the cemetery in Longyearbyen. Late in the afternoon, One coffin was opened and samples were carefully taken. The body was that of an apparently healthy young male. There were no identifying marks.
Sorry, did you get any tissue from the lungs or the respiratory tract?
The body was largely skeletonized. Materials from the areas that we were interested in were sampled.
So, can I clarify that? Sounds like there was no tissue remaining from the lung or respiratory area.
There were no identifiable structures. There were no identifiable structures apart from the bones.
The team opened the other coffins, finding only badly decomposed bits of tissue. So, although somewhat disheartened, they attended a dinner held in their honor.
A fisherman sold an 8-pound salmon to me for $1, so there is no hunger. I worked through the night making 2 new crosses. I will set them in the ground, replacing the now disappeared and rotted ones. Return to San Francisco is scheduled for August the 26th. Best wishes, Johan.
Holton's job was finished. He had done it alone, discreetly, at a cost of $4,500.
It took 50 years to accomplish what I set out to do. I'm glad I demonstrated that it's still possible for a single individual to accomplish something.
Last night back at the hotel, we had a long discussion. And the team decided to continue looking in the permafrost in case there were further possible burials. Finally, I would like to say that we are so excited about the findings. We can now move to phase 3, and we hope that you are equally excited.
On Svalbard, the team tried to put the best face on things.
We know from studies that have been done in other fields that you can get RNA from very decomposed tissue. You know, you don't have to have kind of 100% fresh tissue, fresh frozen to get nucleic acid from. There might very well be really interesting genetic footprints in material that's been warmed up and decayed a bit, actually. So I'm not at all pessimistic about that. I mean, I view it at this stage as there could be exciting possibilities. I mean, there could be several layers of people there. Maybe more people died in
I hope not. We'll be here all year.
Maybe more people died in 1918 than we thought. So that's another possibility. You know, there's not just 7, there's 8, 9, 10 of them.
Within a week of sending Lucy's samples to Taubenberger, Holton got a phone call.
This is the small piece of the 1918 virus. This happens to be the 2 samples from Lucy that we call Breivik 1 and Breivik 5. So what you're actually seeing is the genetic code of the 1918 virus. We generated sequence and it was 1918 flu. It matched exactly. So we knew we had it.
On Svalbard, the expedition was in crisis. The excavation was turning into mud and threatening to cave in.
You know, 80 years ago, we were dealing with probably the coldest summer on record. 80 years later, we're dealing with one of the warmest summers and one of the wettest summers on record. All along in the project, I had promised Kirsty that the first moment I thought things were unsafe, the plug would be pulled. And it was clearly apparent this morning that the work could not continue safely. And at that point, I simply said to Kirsty, I've pulled the plug.
Dr. Smith told us that the first rule of exhumation is you don't know what you have until you actually do the work. That's been one of the #1 principles of this project. He always warned us all the evidence could say one thing, and we might not have anything. The goal was to get soft tissue. We got soft tissue.
There's one thing we know about influenza: it'll prove you wrong almost every time. And so we may be wrong. We may not get a pandemic. But on the other hand, if we're hit with something like H5N1 that moves, you'd better have a plan in place to deal with it. Otherwise, you're going to have millions of dead people on your hands. And you're going to have more than egg on your face.
The odds, in my mind, are 100% that we will have a pandemic in the future. Lots of people ask me, how can you know if a pandemic of the exceptional virulence of the 1918 strain could happen again? And my only answer is that we know it's possible because it happened once. And so for me, the race is, can we learn something about the 1918 virus that can be applied to the future? Right now, generating sequence is almost a kind of a moral imperative for us, that to learn as much about the 1918 virus as possible. Dr. Holt's contribution to provide a large enough sample that would allow us to continue this analysis so that we might ultimately get the entire genetic structure of the virus. Truly, it was an amazing thing to occur.
Jeffrey Taubenberger continues his work on Hulton's sample and archival tissue. The Svalbard expedition has yet to announce any results. In 1918, millions were killed by influenza. We still know little about why or how it kills. We do know there will be another pandemic.